Great. So it's 9 o'clock. Let's get started. I'm sure we have a lot of people who will still be coming in. So again, Dr. John Izzo, and welcome and thank you so much during this very challenging time for so many of us. Thank you for giving me a period of your time this morning. I do appreciate it. So what we're going to do today is really talk about leading during COVID-19. And what I want to do this morning is really to, first of all, welcome you, orient you to the webinar this morning. First of all, you should be able to see me and the slides and hear me. If you can't in the chat box, Ainsley can help you do any technical challenges. I will not be following the chat box while I'm presenting, but Ainsley from our team, who's amazing, will be, and many of you know, will be responding, and it's a chance in the chat box to talk to yourselves. In the Q&A section, I'm going to reserve 15 minutes at the end to take as many of your questions as I can, kind of speed dating style, hopefully. And so we'll get to those, so don't put your questions in the chat box, and unless they're questions to each other, put them in the Q&A box. So first of all, I want to wish all of you well, and I hope you are doing well and your families and businesses are doing well in this challenging time. I've talked to so many of you from all over the world, and we really are in an unprecedented situation. Really the first time perhaps in a very, very long time, in my lifetime, certainly in my 62 years, where the entire world is experiencing a crisis at the same time. And so for many of us, for most of us, this has never happened in our lifetime, and we hope will never happen again. So I know this is a challenging time to lead, and it's a challenging time to live. And so that's why we decided to do this webinar this morning, just to give a gift to all of you. So I'm really going to talk about four things today. First, I want to maybe give some perspective from my perspective on the time that we're living in. Second, I want to speak about how do we stay resilient and take care of our own well-being as leaders. Third, I want to speak with you about how do we keep our teams engaged and motivated during this time. And then finally, how do we really lead virtually? Because many of you now are leading virtually. We're going to start actually this morning by engaging you. So I'm going to actually put a poll up on the screen, a series of questions just to kind of see where everyone's at this morning. So you should see a polling function going up on your screen. And I want you to go ahead and just start answering the questions. There are 5 questions there, and just take a few moments in the poll, and we'll just give you a minute or so to answer those questions. And on some of them you can answer more than one, so hopefully you can see the poll. I don't see anybody answering the poll yet. Let me make sure that the poll is up and running. Should be for all of you a poll there. I don't see anybody voting. Let me just look on the chat function, see if maybe not up. Okay, let's say relaunch polling. Let's see if this works. All right, can you see it now? There we go. The polling is in question. So should be there now. Yes. No. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not sure why the polling is not showing up. So I think maybe we'll let Ainsley work on it. I'm going to try the polling one more time. If the polling doesn't work, back to it. I don't want to waste too much of our time this morning doing that, but let's just try one more time, see if the poll can go up here. I see Mary Ellen saying had some problem with polling yesterday. We're going to try one last time. If the polling doesn't work, we won't worry about polling this morning. So here we go. Nobody voting, so I'm assuming the polling is not working. So I apologize. So we'll see if we can get it up for later. So let's get started. We did want to hear from you, but I know Zoom's having some problems all over the world. So I think their system's a bit overwhelmed. So let's get started. So first, I want to give some perspective to these times that we live in. I always find it valuable at times like this to be a student of history. And I've, over the years, read many histories, especially biographies of people who lived through difficult times. Viktor Frankl's accounts of his experiences in the concentration camp at Auschwitz, a woman in Rwanda who hid in a closet for almost a year every day, wondering if that was the day she was going to be hunted down and killed. I think of my own grandfather who raised three daughters during the Depression and then the beginning of the Second World War. And my own stepfather who passed away a few years ago, but fought for 2 years in Europe as a part of the US Army. And I say that because I want to just reinforce that all of us have more courage and resiliency than we imagine. We do have the courage to live through this time. We do have the courage to stay resilient. We do have the courage to come out on the other end, to find hope. And as difficult as it is, like all crises that we have to live through individually and collectively, we will hopefully learn some things from here. And now is not the time to be thinking about the lessons that this challenge will teach us. But I know that many of us are experiencing this challenge. There's a lot of fear, both economically and personally for our families and our communities. And some of you are in communities right in the middle of it right now. I want you to know my heart goes out to you, but I also want to remind us there will be hope on the other side. The other day I watched the Queen's message, and you know, I love, she said, "We will meet again." And again, if you're a student of history, you know that the Spanish flu epidemic was followed by the Roaring 20s. We did get out again. We did have courage. One important thing to remember, an interesting study done recently, for those of you who say, let's get back to business as quickly as we can. Interesting study done of communities and regions and cities during the Spanish flu epidemic. And it turns out that those communities that stayed locked down longer were actually, their economic recovery was the same as those that unlocked things more quickly, only they had more deaths. So let's not be in a hurry to get back too quickly, because in the long run, it could backfire on us. So again, be a student of history. In fact, all of us in this room today are the descendants of survivors. My own grandfather was in his early 20s during the Spanish flu epidemic. So I'm here because he survived the last pandemic. So again, take heart, but for those of you who are going through challenges, my heart goes out to you. Now, obviously, we need to take care of ourselves during this pandemic. As the leaders, our first responsibility is to care for the self. As parents, our first responsibility to care for the self, because if we don't stay grounded and well, we're not going to be able to really be there for others. So I want to talk about some important things around self-care. First, double down on whatever keeps you centered. All of us have things in our lives that keep us centered. For me, walking is one of those things. So I have maintained that regimen of walking and exercising, even though I can't go to the gym. Connecting it with friends is one of the things that keeps me centered. I've been even more intentional about connecting with friends than usual. So whatever keeps you centered, as hard as it is, double down on your discipline to do the things that are good for you, even when it's hard. The second thing is try to manage the information that you take in. For those of you who are tuning in 24 hours to CNN or Fox or CBC or whatever you watch, please be aware of whether you are taking in information that is actually helping you. You know, there's an old thing about, you know, when you're going to say something, ask yourself, is it useful? Is it helpful? And is it kind? And I think this is a good time for us to ask that question, even in terms of the information we take in when you're checking the news or the internet. First of all, is it useful? Do I actually need that information? Second, is it helpful to me? Was checking that information today helpful for me? And finally, was it kind to myself to do that? So I personally have tried to limit the amount of information I take in. I check about twice a day, once in the morning. I try to be more aware of what's happening locally. And then I check once early in the evening, and then don't check after dinner time, because I find it's helpful to me. So just be aware of whether the information you're exposing yourself to is helpful or not. This is a very important time for meditation, and whether you are a meditator or not, what I merely mean is before you start running into your day, many of you are working at home now, just begin in a moment of calm if you can. Just begin just taking a few moments at the beginning of the day and take a few breaths and center yourself. Whenever you feel out of sorts in the middle of the day, and many people have talked to me about, and I experienced this myself, going up and down as the day goes on, energetically, going up and down in terms of your motivation. When you really feel out of sorts, take a few moments, close your eyes, and just be centered. And the same thing even in meetings, whether they're virtual or in person with your team, just take a few moments and let everyone take a breath before we get started. I want to remind you how important purpose is when we're going through a challenge. Again, being a big student of Viktor Frankl's work, one of the things that he talked about in his experience in the concentration camps is that those people who had a sense of purpose were able to endure the hardship and survive at far higher levels than those who didn't connect to purpose. And one of the things Viktor Frankl talked about is waking up in the morning and asking, what can I give the world today? And it begins by repurposing our staying home for those of us who are locked down, which is most of us now, that we're staying home not only to protect ourselves, but to protect the most vulnerable and ultimately to protect the functioning of society. Find ways to be kind. If your income continues, be generous to those in your community. Find personal ways to be helpful to others. The more we connect to purpose, the more we will stay grounded. Make sure to try to stay in the now. Never more important moment than now to stay in the now, no pun intended, because there's something that they talk about in psychology called anticipatory grief, which is not only grieving the current experience of a loss of business or a loss of connection or a loss of freedom or fear, but now taking on all the grief that may or may not happen in the future. Will I lose my job? Will my business ever come back? Will me or all my loved ones die from COVID? Try to stay in the moment. Remember, as Leo Buscaglia, the great Italian-American philosopher said, he said that worry never robs tomorrow of its sorrow, but it always robs today of its joy. So try, whenever you find your mind racing to all the things that could happen, all the bad outcomes that could happen, try to come back to the moment and realize that you can't do anything and that most of these things are actually unlikely, all the really bad things that we imagine. Finally, know who your go-to people are. All of us have a few people in our lives that when we talk to them, we just feel centered. You know, my friend David is one of those people for me. When I go to David, I just feel more grounded. know who those people are, and let them know, look, I know I'm calling you more than I normally do, but you know, you're one of my go-to people. And if you're a go-to person for someone, be there for them. And finally, just stay current with yourself. Just try to be aware of what's happening, and certainly have some grace for yourself. A lot of my team members on both organizations that I'm a part of at UBC and in Izzo Associates have talked about our productivity, you know, going up and down, and some days you're up and some days you're down, and some days you're motivated, some days you're not. Have some grace with yourself. That's the way it's going to be for a while. And don't be so hard on yourself. When I'm unproductive for an hour, I sometimes just take a walk, or, you know, just go easy on myself, then maybe I'm working at night. So these are just some ideas. And again, we'll take some questions, and feel free to comment in the chat section. Now, the second thing, I want to talk a little bit now about how do you keep your team engaged during this time? How do you keep them motivated? And again, I'm going to go through some of this quickly, and we'll get to questions. Feel free in the chat to chat with Ainsley and with each other. First, the obvious thing, be more connected and more appreciative than usual. People need to, as leaders, to hear more from us, to see more of us, to feel more connected, to feel more appreciation than usual. So we have to double down on those things. We, of course, need more communication, and please use videos. I've been on so many calls in the last few weeks on the various teams and boards that I'm on. And so many people have said, it's just so good to see all of you. It's just so good to feel your presence. So, you know, I know there's some problems with Zoom right now, but use video, stay connected to your teams. The visual is so much more important. And I know at our team at UBC, we've certainly found that we're starting to really get used to feeling present with each other with the video. For those of you in more senior positions of leadership, be as transparent as you can. Share as much information as you can. In the absence of information, human beings make up information. There's a lot of fear of where the business is going, fear of the loss of our jobs or our business. Be transparent. State your intentions. And this one's very important. Only make promises that you can keep. Again, I've been very careful in my own business and the two that I'm a part of to make promises, but only those promises that you know you can keep. If you can make promises that make people feel more secure, make those promises. State intentions if you can't make promises. Be transparent. This is an important one. Listen deeply. People are going to have a lot of different emotions right now. And when you check in with people, remember that we often can't fix what people are feeling, but that just witnessing, just allowing people to go where they need to go, whether it's anger or fear or disappointment or grief, that it's okay. And that as leaders, one of the most profound things we can do is simply to listen. I know it's challenging. I know this is hard. And look, we're going to make it. But try not to be in fix-it mode. Try to listen deeply. Certainly with your own teams, stay focused on how you're adding value. And the more that you can really be focused on adding value to those you serve right now, what's the purpose? What role is your company playing even in the downturn? How can you add value as a team? And even if some of the normal metrics are not as high or as good as they are, how are we adding value? What's our purpose? How does our team and our organization really serve? Make sure that you're realistic about what we can accomplish now. One of the most difficult things in a crisis like this, especially because it's an unprecedented kind of lockdown in so many places, is that there's so much variability in what can be accomplished and what can be accomplished now. I know in our work at UBC, at the Men's Initiative that I am a co-founder of, you know, in our athlete program, for example, for university athletes, this is not a time that athletic directors and coaches want us to reach out to them to try to convince them to use our programs for athletes around their well-being and integrity. But this is a time that we can create lists of people we can contact when the crisis abates. This is a time that we can do curriculum development. So really ask the question and help your team focus on what we can accomplish during this time. Make sure to include check-ins in your team meetings. Many of you may already do this, and by check-ins, I mean just a quick check-in with everyone. How are you doing? One of the amazing things about human beings is sometimes just being able to name the exact feeling that we're feeling, or as David White, the poet, says, to name the exact way we feel in exile is itself a healing. And so have these check-ins. I know one of the things we've been doing on our team is that because now we're meeting more often virtually, we may have just met the day before. So instead of doing a check-in every single day, we might say, hey, anybody got anything they need to check in about? And please, it's okay to do so. So in other words, create space for people to just talk about how they're feeling, what's happening for them, not just the work. Be aware of the normal curve for your team. You know, we all know kind of the normal curve of our team members, their emotions, how they act. And if somebody is way outside the normal curve in terms of anger or anxiousness or not being productive or all the metrics we might be using, make sure you got some mental health tips and help available for them. A lot of virtual mental health going on in your larger organizations. There probably are resources. There certainly are resources in your community. So if somebody really is acting outside that curve, please say, hey, John, maybe this is a good time to reach out to someone, and let me suggest some things. You know, I want to make you aware of a tool that I recently became aware of from one of my clients. If you go to amplify.com, not now, by the way, you'll get a copy of these slides afterwards, we promise, or just write it down. But if you go to amplify.com/wellbeing, they've launched a free pulse check-in around COVID that organizations or teams can use with their employees. And it's very focused on trying to stay current in a quick pulse survey on what's happening with your team during this time. And a number of my clients have said that it has proved to be valuable. Finally, two more things. Know what your people can handle. Some of your people can handle thinking long-term right now, but some can only focus on the near term. Be just aware as you bring up things that are long or short-term of where different team members and where your team is at. And remember, sometimes in a crisis, people just want to know what to do. I know a lot of the people who follow me, many of you who share some of my views, love to be participative leaders. We love to engage people in their ideas. And as you know, I'm a big proponent of that philosophy. But sometimes during a crisis, we just want our leaders to tell us what to do. You know, when the airplane is in trouble, we don't want the captain to come on and say, let's take a vote. Do you think we should put the oxygen masks on? Do you think we should head to an alternative airport or see how it goes? You know, sometimes during a crisis, we want our leaders to lead. And that we'll talk about that again in just a moment. What about leading our teams virtually? Here's some things to think about. You know, I've been working at home for, you know, most of my career. Even though I have an office, I work at home most of the time. Those of you for whom this is new, and if your team members are working at home in a new way, keep a dedicated workspace. Have a place in the home that you only work there, if at all possible. Why? Because then it's easier to focus, easier to separate. Use video for communicating with your teams. Don't just use audio. And a good idea is just have some virtual water cooler time. Often with Zoom, if you have a team of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people, you can have everyone on and just some open space, the kind of space you might have over the lunch hour. One of my colleagues, Nancy McKay, who runs a CEO network, on Saturday night has been having a virtual cocktail party for an hour and a half on Saturday nights. There's just a small group of 13, 14 people that are coming to that cocktail party. And I can't tell you how much it's meant, just 13 or 14 colleagues to just have some virtual space together. Set goals and timeframes for yourself. Again, I've been working at home for many years. And when you're at home, it's really important to, look at your day and go, all right, how am I going to spend this day? I'm going to spend this hour on this and this hour and a half on this. Here's some goals I have for the day. We have to be even more focused. Create boundaries to your personal life. Here's the time I'm going to work. Here's the time I'm going to do personally. Share that with the family. Make sure that you can divide up the responsibilities in a way that allow you to have focused work time. Remember how disruptive interruptions are to our productivity. So 2 or 3 hours really being focused is worth a lot more in terms of productivity than having a lot of time that's interrupted. We need to be even more clear on deliverables when people are working virtually. We can't really manage time, but we can manage deliverables. Again, we have to have some grace right now, but try to get really clear with a virtual team. What are the deliverables today? What are the deliverables this week? What are the things that we're focused on? Make sure you ask your people what they need. Make sure you check in with your team, both individually as in a group. How's the virtual working going? What do you need from us? Probe if needed. So this is a great time for us to really check in with people. Hey, John, how's it going? Hey, Ainsley, how's it going? And some people will just say, oh, it's fine, everything's good. Maybe you sense everything's not good. So, instead of just saying, well, how are you really? And this is my colleague, and many of you know Jeremy, a good friend and colleague for many years, suggested, make sure you probe a little bit with some different questions like, hey, what's your biggest challenge right now? Or, hey, what do you need most now? Or what are you feeling really good about now? So, if people say I'm fine and you sense maybe it's not so, then, ask some other questions. Now, the final piece I want to talk about today before I open it up and kind of deal with some of your specific questions is I want to talk about some keys to leading in crisis. How do we lead when, we're in crisis? What are some key things to think about? The first thing is that what we want most from leaders in crisis is we want them to be decisive, we want them to be calm, and we want them to be hopeful. First, we do want leaders to be decisive. I talked about that a moment ago. We want our leaders to have a sense of where we're going, a sense of what we can do. And whether we like it or not as leaders, it's our job to think about what can we accomplish now? How can we add value? What are our priorities? What should we be doing? Second, we must remain calm. So I want you to go back again and again to the slide about how you take care of yourself. There's a great saying in the Zen tradition that you should meditate for 20 minutes every day, unless you're really busy, in which case you should meditate for an hour. And I love that because it's kind of funny, right? But it also is really true. We have to work even harder as leaders to exude as much calm as we can. Therefore, we have to know the go-to people we go to where we can express whatever fear and emotion we have so we can be calm to our team. And finally, be hopeful. We need our leaders to be hopeful, to say, look, I know this is difficult, but we will get to the other side. Again, be a good student of history. Some of you lived through the financial crisis. Some of you lived through the dot-com bust. Reassure people, again, of the hope on the other side. Manage scenarios. Deloitte just came out with an interesting study about how to lead a business in a crisis like COVID. And one of the most important things is to do some scenario planning and to think about especially high impact but low probability events. So I'll give you an example in a nonprofit that is one part of my business. We've had to ask, what happens if our biggest funder says they can't make the next payment? Now, we think that's a low probability event, but we had to ask the question, what happens if that happened? And have contingency plans in place. And the reason that's so important is that it gives you a sense of calm, knowing that you are prepared for the worst, even if it doesn't happen. And then what are the different scenarios and how would we respond? This is an important one. The research shows that most market share or more market share is gained during downturns than during upturns. Now, that doesn't mean your business is growing, but more market share is gained during downturns. Even if the pie is smaller, this is a time when many companies gain market share. So when the pie grows again, so does the business. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, your competitors may go out of business, but the research says more likely how your competitors responded during the crisis set up a situation where their market share shrank. So what are some things we should think in mind? Even if business is on the decline, we can still add value to our clients. And I think one of the things that we all should be thinking right now is, how can I add value to my clients? How can I add value to the space that I'm in, even if I'm not going to get rewarded for it right now? What do my clients need? What are they struggling with? How can we add value? I'll give you a great example. RBC has been a great client of mine over the years, maybe a few RBC folks in the room. And an RBC leader was telling me the other day that many of their people who handle new business, there's not a lot of new business to be had in some parts of the business right now. But many of the salespeople are checking in with existing clients for no reason except to say, how are you doing? How's it going? Anything that we can do to support you, we're there for you. And the leader told me two things. First, the client said, I really appreciated you checking in to see how I was doing. And second, the staff member said, this has given me a sense of purpose of something that I can do in the meantime. And second, remember, people are watching and will remember how you handled this time. Amazon is a good example, right? A lot of people watching right now, how is Amazon taking care of these people who are continuing to serve us? How is Walmart and the grocery stores, how are they taking care of people and protecting their safety? Remember that people are watching how we're handling this crisis, how we're treating our people, how we're keeping them and ourselves safe. And remember, on the other side of this crisis, how we handled it will buy us goodwill to grow our market share when things change. Work on relationships more than immediate sales. There may not be as many immediate sales, but we can still work on the relationship so that we're really building relationships even during difficult times. And again, checking in, see how things are going. Ask, how can we add value even if people aren't buying right now, become really important pieces. And it is important to look for opportunities. How might we serve now in new ways that we haven't served before? So for example, in my business of the education and training business, certainly a lot of people are taking a new look now at electronic communication and how to add value in virtual ways. The important piece there is don't go chasing down rabbit holes of things that you may not do long-term, but start to think about how might we serve in ways that we have not served before. What things might become the norm on the other side of this crisis that maybe weren't normal before. And so in the restaurant business, for example, that's been hit so hard, there's a very good chance that on the other side of this, there will be more delivery of restaurant meals than ever. People may get used to eating at home. One of the things we learned from the Spanish flu epidemic, again, to be a student of history, is that when they opened up the economy again, people didn't just run out and start living their lives the way they did before. The fear remained for a long period of time. So what that means is that some of the ways we serve virtually, or some of the ways we learn to serve during this time, may become very important for a time to come. So again, just be alert to opportunities that may not have been there before, but also because crisis tends to breed creativity, this is a really good time to start thinking about other ways we could serve our customers, not just in the crisis, but maybe just to open up the spigots for creativity. Final thing I want to say is, in a crisis, there are two things we have to do as leaders. First, we have to maintain the viability of the business, and that is paramount. We must ask what's core in the business, what must I protect? Because, and that often means keeping key team members, it means keeping core functions. What must I protect for the long-term sustainability of the business? And the second thing is, what can we do now to get ready for when the crisis abates? So for example, to use an example at our center at UBC, we know we can do a lot of development of our programs for firefighters and police officers and university athletes, for coaches, that we can double down our efforts to develop those programs so when the demand comes back, we are ready. We can double down creating lists of potential prospects for those programs that can make a big difference in those communities. So when people are ready to get our calls again, we can do that. We can talk to other partner organizations who are like us or less busy doing work, but more open to talking about partnership when the work comes back. So spend energy on things that will get you ready when things begin to get back to normal, but make sure you protect the core of the business. And that means don't make short-term decisions that are going to hurt the long-term of the business. So there's a bunch of ideas. I'm going to now start to check in with the chat a little bit and the questions. So let me get the questions up on the screen, and I'm also going to get the chat up on the screen. I also want to remind you that we are going to archive this webinar. You'll get it in the next 24 to 48 hours. Feel free to share the link when you get it with others. We also will send you a copy of the slides. Let's get some of the questions. I'm also going to see if the poll works one more time. Oh, good. We did get the poll. I'm going to show the poll results right now. Let's do that real quickly. Let me share the results of the poll, then I'll get to some of your questions. So the biggest interest today, managing, motivating your team, #1. Leading a team now virtual, #2. Managing uncertainty, #3. And maintaining personal resilience, #4. How are you feeling today? You can see the results there. 38% hopeful. What a great group of people engaged with my work. I love it. But 32% of us are worried. And of course, we do have some confusion and very engaged. So that's exciting that many of you are hopeful and engaged. 86% of us working at home. Wow. 11% still going for the office. Amazing. And not employed at present, 1. And I apologize, looks like some of the poll did not come through for some people, but and so I do apologize. Less connected to colleagues, 62%, 38% more connected. Biggest challenge as a leader right now, number 1, balancing needs of work and family, and 22% motivating staff and going from there. So I'll relaunch the poll in case others want to weigh in, but meantime, let me get back to some of your questions. So let me go through some of these. So a lot of change and transformation happening due to external circumstances. The tendency is that as soon as things get back to normal, people get back to old habits. How can we keep the momentum alive? You know, I think one of the interesting things is that during a crisis, we often figure out the way we should be working all the time. And I think one of the things you can do, Daniel, is to regularly ask yourself and ask the team, what are we learning about being effective and working effectively in this crisis that we want to take with us going forward? So a great question, maybe once a week or so, to ask your team, what are we learning about our work that we need to keep doing? Because you're right, we often learn things that make us more productive, more connected, things we learn about our clients. So again, very important that we catalog those for ourselves and ask the team to do the same. Anonymous attendee, any tips for working moms with 110% active toddlers? Wow, been so long since I have had active toddlers. I do have 2 daughters, but been a long time since I've had active toddlers. But I do have some friends in that situation. First, of course, if you have a partner in the house, I think it's very important to tag team. Very important to say, look, they're yours for a while. So 2 people distracted instead of 1 is probably, not as productive. So try to really tag team rather than both being interrupted all the time. Second thing is, and again, I've been a long time since I've been in that category. Maybe others can weigh in on the chat room for anonymous. But one other thought I have is some of those rules you have, I don't want them watching so much TV. You know, I don't want them playing too many video games. Might be a good time to relax some of those things. It's okay right now for you to take a break. Their long-term growth and mental acuity will not be diminished because they watch a little more television or play a little more video games or do a little more things that are not ultimately, what we want them to be doing. So give yourself a break too. You won't be the perfect mom. You won't be the perfect dad in this situation. And you gotta really take care of yourself. How to build trust with employees who are working from home without micromanaging them. We talked a little bit before about this, but let me say it's really important during this time to be trusting. One of the things we know about working at home generally is that trust and trusting people working at home is really important. Try not to micromanage their time. Try to manage to deliverables. Try to negotiate with them reasonable expectations about specific deliverables. Here's what we're going to accomplish this week. Is this a reasonable deadline? And check in around deliverables rather than activities. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, people are going to find that sometimes they don't work straight through the day. It's different if they have like contact, maybe they're in the contact center or something. But people are going to have moments of productivity. They may get up at 6 a.m. like I do sometimes these days, and I'm working at 6 a.m., 6 to 8. but by 8 I'm burned out and I need to take a walk. Or maybe they work late into the evening. So work to deliverables. And then if you sense there's a productivity issue, then engage them in a conversation. Hey, you know, we've missed a few deliverables in the last couple of days. Just wondering what's happening. You know, try to come at it without judgment and help them think through how to work at home. And lots of good tools online, in addition to what I did about how to work effectively at home. Understand many of the people you're managing may never have worked at home. You know, I've been doing it for 25 years, so I know how to be productive at home. A lot of people don't. So you may have to get active giving them tips on how to work effectively at home. And those who are being effective, ask for their ideas to share with the team. Marshall asks, most human lifestyle stability is based on the dollars we have. How do we minimize the stress of the domino effect of not maintaining revenue coming in while we have bills to pay? You know, Marshall, great question. And look, this is something that all of us are dealing with. You know, in my business, in the Izzo Associates side of my business, you know, our revenue is, you know, probably gone down 95%, you know, in literally in 30 days with events being canceled, et cetera. But a lot of people, a lot more live issue for them day to day. Very important, again, for people, Marshall, not to take on that anticipatory grief, to play out all the worst case scenarios. Second, this is why those high impact, low probability scenarios are so important, because people can run a stress test on the worst that could happen, that they imagine might happen in the short and the medium term, and know that they can handle that and know the steps that they can take if revenue does not come in, then that helps. The other thing is, if you're running a business, it's really important to know the core of the business you're trying to protect, so that you know you're protecting that for the long-term health of the business. So having that long-term perspective is so important. And some of that stress we're not going to be able to alleviate, because there's not going to be as much revenue coming in. There's not going to be as much. So we're going to have to work on our own self-talk, and again, do those stress tests around the most critical things. And certainly if you got some ideas, Marshall, put them in the chat box. Thoughts on leveraging this time to build past leadership business silos for improved collaboration when we emerge on the other side? A great question, Dion. Again, I always like to ask, what can we do now that we don't have time to do when we're so busy? And I think this is a great example of where we can get to know other departments. We can build bridges. We can talk about how we might work together. We can fine tune our processes. Those, you know, might think about all those, Dion, those lists of things that you always said you would get to internally in the business. Well, one day we're going to work on this because this is in the way of our productivity, or one day we're going to work on this because it's in the way of our effectiveness. Great time to work on some things that, again, will have an impact on the business down the road. Elizabeth asked, is it still possible at this time to have some paid programs in addition to the complimentary? Any suggestion on pricing? Good question. We're asking that in our business. I do think that, you know, we have to be careful about, one person in my business had a great analogy. When people are drowning, you don't want to be yelling at them in the ocean, hey, would you like to buy some swimming lessons? So those of us, especially who are in the education and training or you know, professional services business, have to be a little careful not to be trying to sell swimming lessons to people who are drowning. But I think in a thoughtful way, we can make offerings, and yes, they probably should be priced differently than we might have priced them during, you know, other times. For example, we're doing some web work with clients now, and often at about half the price that we normally would do that. I don't take advantage of that, many of your clients, but you know, it's a recognition of the times that we live in and that it won't be that way forever. Do I believe COVID-19 is a stress test for corporate purpose and that companies who don't have a purpose articulated will be less resilient? Three thoughts on that, Frederick. First, I think that purpose will survive COVID-19. If you look at what happened to people's desire for purpose and desire for buying and working for companies that did good, that the trend actually paused temporarily and then grew during the financial crisis. I believe the same thing will happen with COVID-19. It is a stress test for corporate purpose, because I believe companies are going to be watched more deeply now than they have in the past about how they handle the crisis. And there will be a price to pay on the other side for companies that both internally and externally do not work with purpose. And I do think those that focus on purpose now will have higher levels of motivation during the crisis. Do I think a business will come out more or less on purpose? I just answered that. Short term, yes, Maslow's hierarchy will probably go back to a focus on safety. But again, if you look at what happened during the financial crisis, the trend towards social responsibility, sustainability, and purpose grew even during and beyond the crisis. I have no reason to think it won't be even more so this time. And as I talk to leaders, I talk to a lot of senior leaders, I don't hear any of them backing down on purpose, and many of them leaning into it. Now, there may be a temporary, of course, shift while people are so focused on survival, and that, of course, is to be expected. How to best help a staff member who isn't engaging in optional virtual team meetings, sends us coffees and checks in, wants minimal contact. Again, remember, everyone is different. We need to be respectful of those differences, but I would do a one-on-one with them and say two things. First, I notice you haven't been checking in it much. I just want to see how you're doing. And I'd love to understand why you feel you're not checking in as much as you normally do. Just want to make sure you're okay. And second, appeal to their purpose of how they could add value, even if they don't feel the need to check in, to realize that they can add value. So say you may not need it, but your team members need the contact from you. By the way, one of those times of the crisis, I didn't quite get that shaving there. So I just realized, well, I missed that spot, but oh well, COVID, one of the consequences. How do you get everyone to use video? Most people at my work are reluctant to use the video feature on Zoom. Joel, good question. Insist that they use it. And I don't mean insist like meaning order it, but let them know why. Share some of your own experiences that, like I've shared, about when people saying, wow, it was so good just to see everyone. Let them know you want to see them, because seeing their face makes you a little happier. And again, do that on a one-on-one. Don't embarrass them in front of the group. At the end of the day, if people don't want to, don't force them to do it, but one-on-one encourage them and say, look, I'd love to see your face, because when I see your face, it makes me a little happier, and your team loves to see you. And just do everything you can to build them up and encourage them, but certainly don't force them to do it, but encourage them one-on-one. Any ideas on how to handle leading work COVID isolation when you're grieving the loss of a spouse and living alone? Well, Debbie, first of all, thank you for that question. And if you are personally experiencing that, I want to send my heart out to you. I'm tearing up a little bit at that thought. And it also reminds me of how many people are isolating alone, who may have gone through a divorce, lost a loved one, a child, a spouse, a partner, a roommate. First of all, have some grace for yourself. Second, ask for what you need. Do Zoom calls and Skype calls with your go-to people. Don't carry it by yourself. And even people who may not have been a core part of your support system, you might find are willing to be there for you now. So please don't go it alone. Please ask for help. Please, reach out and be honest about how you're feeling. And again, one of the things that I know, I lost my mother a couple of years ago. I know a little bit about grief, not just because I've studied it, but because I have experienced it myself. It comes in waves, so have some grace with yourself, and take care of yourself. Don't worry about, what others expect of you, and please reach out. The Swedes have a phrase, a burden shared is a burden halved. And so first of all, my heart goes out to all those who are isolated. Don't isolate yourself more than you need to. Please reach out and let people know what you need. That's the best thing that you can do, and have as much grace with yourself as you can. And happy to talk one-on-one if that's valuable. Let Ainsley know. How can we support our team to stay engaged without coming across as disingenuous or forced? The appearance of leaders checking in can be self-preservation. Hey, you know what? Good time to take a chance. Just say, look, maybe I'm bothering you more than I should, but I'm doing it because I care. Don't worry about being disingenuous. Just be ingenuous. Be sincere, and you'll discover what happens. Do you think work habits will change to a more relaxed view when we get back to normal? Will more flexible hours and working to deliverables? I hope so. I think we should get back to working with deliverables. I think there will be more working at home as people discover that we're, able to do that. And let me say, by the way, we'll run over a few minutes today, and I'll answer as many of the questions as I can. If you have to leave us on the top of the hour, I want to thank you for being a part of the webinar. We will send you out the archive. We will send you a copy of the slides, but I'll stay for a few minutes and answer as many of the questions as I can. I don't have a hard stop. If you have to go, I understand. I want to thank you again for joining us. And again, you will be hearing from us. Jim Lingelbach, great. Jim, good to haven't seen you in a long time. Hope you're well. What are your thoughts on various conspiracy theories being talked about? One example, Event 201, and the idea of this COVID is a plandemic. I think the ideas are ridiculous. I agree with you, Jim. Human beings look for order even when there's no order. There's a reason why so many people think that Oswald did not act by himself in spite of overwhelming evidence that he probably did. And the reason is because we find it hard to believe that a tiny little virus from a bat could change all of human culture, just like we found it hard to believe that one deranged man with a gun could kill the most powerful person in the world in 1963. So that doesn't mean once in a while there aren't conspiracies in the world, but I think we can be pretty sure this one wasn't planned. Many associates overwhelmed and consumed and restricted in a living state, not seeing what's ahead. There are gray clouds of recession, depression. Ideas on best way to transparently talk about realities without creating a sense of hopelessness and victim. Thanks for that question, Brent. I think, again, we want to be as transparent as possible, but not overwhelm people with information. I like to think of, I fly a lot, so I like and have a lot of pilot friends. So I always think about an airplane analogy, right? If I'm sitting in the back of an airplane that has a problem, I do want the pilot to communicate. I don't want silence from the cockpit. I want as honest a communication as I can, but I don't want the pilot to tell me all the bad things that could happen. If we could land, even though that engine is on fire, I don't want the captain to come on and say, well, the contingency plan is that I'm going to ditch in a cornfield. It's not really necessary for him or her to say that to me. So I want that pilot to exude as much calm as possible, I want them to be transparent, because in the absence of communication, I will make up the reality, right? So if I see that engine on fire, and I know it's on fire, and our businesses are kind of on fire now in many cases, our people know that, we have to be transparent, state our intentions, don't make promises we can't keep. But it's okay not to talk about the worst scenarios, except to say, look, we are constantly as leaders doing planning, we're trying to protect the business. And if there are key parts of the business that you know you're protecting, then let those people know that. I've done that in my own work of letting key people and team members know that, hey, look, I just want you to know we're not going to be letting you go. We've done the contingency planning, and we know that your function is core. And again, some hopelessness and victim feeling is natural. That's why we must give people things they can do. The worst thing in a crisis is to have nothing you can do. So to go back to that airplane analogy, in most cases, there's nothing the passengers can do. But why do you think the pilot says, hey, everybody pray? I remember there was a Korean airliner that had a problem, and the captain came on and said, whatever your religious persuasion is, would you pray now? And now, by the way, I believe in prayer, as many of you know. I'm a believer myself. But even if I didn't believe in prayer, it's a wise thing for the captain to do, because he's saying, or she's saying, he in this case, there is something you can do. You can pray. And so I'm not suggesting you ask your people to pray, though probably wouldn't be a bad idea as well, is give your people things they can do that they feel can help the possibility of your company, your team surviving. Because again, the worst thing is to be in the back of the airplane feeling there's nothing you can do. Give people a sense of purpose, give them a sense of here's what we can do that will make it most likely we can stay successful. How can we get our team to see the light at the end of the tunnel and believe we'll get through this crisis? I'm truly grateful for some of the books you've read, like The 5 Secrets in Stepping Up. Thank you. And Ken, thanks for those comments, and the same back to you and everyone to stay safe and healthy. Look, I've talked a little about this before. Be a student of history. If your company survived the financial crisis, say, look, we got through the financial crisis, we got through the dot-com bubble. Remind people that the Spanish flu epidemic was followed by the Roaring 20s. We will get through this. Point to history. And that's all we can do, right? And say to people, look, what we do now together is going to make a big difference in terms of our success. So keep people focused on what they can do. As you know, in my book, Stepping Up, I talk a lot about focusing people on what they can do instead of what they can't do. And we know that successful salespeople rarely focus on the external impacts to their success, but focus on what they can control. So get your people focused on here's what we can do to bring the light at the end of the tunnel, and remind them of other crises that humanity and we as a company have survived. History to me is always the greatest, because humanity survived. Like I said, the other day I got a call from my great uncle, who was the nephew of my grandfather. So his father and my grandfather's father were brothers. And both my grandfather and his father survived in their early 20s the Spanish flu epidemic. And he's 95 years old now. I'm 62. And we were just talking about, we were both the descendants of survivors. So being a student of history, every one of us on this call today are the descendants of survivors. Our ancestors survived, and we will too. So let's keep the hope, and let's be realistic, but be students of history. Some employees more anxious than others. Is there yes, how much flexibility you give an individual, Marvio, who's going through a hard time? Yes, but take history into effect. During this crisis time, some people who were very productive will be less productive. Some people who were less productive will be more productive virtually because they deal with crisis differently. Look, if somebody was not effective before the crisis and they're even less effective now when we have tough decisions to make, that may be the person or persons that we have to let go for the sake of the business staying successful. So, but take into account the long arc of that person. If someone has been very productive and a great performer or a good performer before, and suddenly now they're not dealing with the crisis, I'm going to give those people a lot more slack than if they weren't productive and effective before the crisis. So make sure you bear that in mind. Am I moving my speaking from in-person to virtual? Well, you know, today we just did this to add value because we know so many of you are hurting. We probably are going to offer some virtual things, and we're talking to some clients already around that, and we certainly welcome your ideas. How can a small to medium enterprise do to survive the crisis in terms of cash flow? Ken, I know both countries are doing a lot of things to, help with payroll and supporting businesses. I know just one of my clients in Michigan just let me know they got a loan from the SBA. Air Canada, one of my clients, brought some of their employees back because the government of Canada is subsidizing 75% of the wages. Again, some of my businesses, the senior leaders taking sacrifice. Some businesses asking everyone to take a cut to go to less hours so the whole team can survive. Again, I always say, look at the high impact, low probability scenario. Make sure you can protect the core of the business. Ask everyone to take a sacrifice in the short term for the long-term success of the business. And maybe cut everyone's hours back so everyone can sacrifice, give people a chance to weigh in on that. You'll find most times people will be willing to make that sacrifice. But Ken, tough situation, you got to look at every possibility. You got to make sure to protect the sustainability of the business for the long term, because if that's not there, then you can't do that. Sometimes we might furlough people and say, as some restaurants have done, and said, look, we're going to hold your job, so you just be guaranteed when we open back up, we're going to hire you. We're not going to go look for someone else. Just a few more things. If there were 3 things that are most important for a business to do today through the end of the year, Marshall, good question. First, protect the core of the business. Second, focus on what you can do now to grow market share and relationships and to grow the internal success of the business, whether it's product development or improving your processes, so that when the business grows again, you can be successful, and keep your core talent. If you lose those really good people or treat them in a way that gets in the way, that's going to hamper the long-term success of the business. John Lowry, hi John. When you go, John, great leader of applied imaging and doing a lot of the things that we talked about. Good friend, good client of mine. When we go back to work, would you suggest we do so in waves, not everyone at once? Yes, likely. I love what Mark Cuban, who owns the Dallas Mavericks and of Shark Tank fame, said yesterday. When we go back, who's the first person who's going to want to go into a room of 8 people at a meeting? People are going to be very nervous, and we know from the Spanish flu pandemic and what we're seeing in China is that we have to go slowly. Do not just go from closed to open. Bring back the people who will be least vulnerable, where we can keep distance. Bring back the people who are who can be effective at home, leave them at home. And the people who can be less effective at home may be the first people we bring back. Make sure we can create a feeling of safety there in terms of physical distancing and cleanliness. And also for the success of the business, don't ramp up and have to ramp back, up and back. Try to slowly re-engage. A few more questions here, and we'll end at on the 15 after the hour. Diane, thanks for the topic. How can remote workers do to support those essential members of the team who have to work on the front lines, go back into the office? great question. I haven't really thought a lot about that, Diane, but certainly have them check in, have them send appreciation. Those people who are in the office are more vulnerable. Those people on the front line, let's say in a grocery or a retail business, an airline, the post office, those people who are still on the front line in a bank, the people in the branches that are still open are more vulnerable. Send them appreciation, have team members reach out to them, let them know how important they are to the business and how much we appreciate them. Send them gifts, you know, and give them all the love that you can. Working from home likely it means to increase media exposure, 24-hour news cycle. I talked about this before. Edward, thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts on the potential role of leaders as a counterpoint? You know, I think we can play a filtering role. Here's the news that's important for us as a business. Try to filter for people through the noise so that people can see, you know, what's important and what's not important. Remember the three things I talked about earlier. Is it helpful? Is it useful? And is it kind? Try to encourage people to limit their exposure. You know, Seth Godin, marketing guru who I follow, says you could probably check in for 10 to 15 minutes a day and get all the news you actually need in this situation. And Seth is probably right. I don't know if 15 minutes is like the exact right amount of 10 or 15 minutes, but his point is well taken. That's what I've done. I check in the morning. I check in, you know, around dinner time, then don't check the rest of the evening. And I also try to expose myself to things that are more helpful. Like I've been watching more business news because I find the business news talks more about practical things and the virus some of the time, whereas the true news channels will overwhelm you with the virus literally every minute, and you'll just go nuts if you're listening. So the news channel, the business channels give you just the dose you need, no pun intended. How do you, just a couple of more questions, then we'll end. Louise, how do you graciously let go of employees in a virtual manner? Well, maybe you got to go back and watch Up in the Air with George Clooney, and you'll figure out how not to do it. Look, the first thing is, Louise, if I have to do that, I'm going to recognize, look, I don't feel good about doing this way. To have to give you this news in this way without being able to talk to you, it really breaks my heart. I thought of, and this may be a good place to come to a close, and I will answer that last question. Oh, sorry, for Ken from Singapore, thank you very much. One day goal to meet you in person. Ken, I look forward to that myself, and I wish the best for Singapore and Malaysia. So Louise, let's end with a story that I think is to your point. Just yesterday here in Vancouver, as many of you know, I live in Vancouver and in Southern California, but I'm here in Vancouver now. There was a nurse at St. Paul's Hospital, a male nurse, who was talking about a 90-year-old COVID patient who died in his hospital. And he talked about the fact that he was in full protective gear with the, you know, the suit on and a N95 mask and a glass shield and thick gloves. And he was going to be the last person that this 90-year-old man would see. He got the phone and had the man's best friend talk to him on the phone. And he said, all I could do, because I couldn't talk to him, he couldn't see my face, was with my gloves, I held his hand as he died. And he said, I wanted to do more, but I didn't want him to die without someone holding his hand. And then the nurse teared up as he told that story. And I teared up as I listened to him. And Louise, these are tough times. And as leaders, we will have to do some tough things. But even if we can't physically hold someone's hand, we can open up our big hearts, and we can let people know how hard it is. And we can let them know that it breaks our heart to do this, and that we can't imagine how they feel, but we want them to know that we care. And sometimes, like that nurse, that's all we can do. And if we're doing it virtually, with our face, with our eyes, with our words, we can be as kind and as gentle as we can. And let me end by saying, I know many of us as leaders will have to communicate bad news in the next weeks ahead. We'll have to make tough decisions. That is, at the end of the day, unfortunately, what leaders must do. But I'll go back to where I began. Be a good student of history. We will get through this. There will be light on the other side of the tunnel. If we're fortunate, individually and collectively, we will also learn something through this about ourselves, about each other, and how to be more successful the next time a crisis comes. So I send my prayers and my well wishes to all of you. I thank so many of you for joining us. I wish you well to your family, your lives, your businesses, and your communities. And I send you hope, and I send you love. So thank you again. I really appreciate you being a part of today's conversation. We will send you a link so that you can get all this good information. So thank you so much. And again, love to all those who have lost someone, who have suffered during this time. We send our prayers and our thoughts from all of us here on the Izzo team. Thanks again, and we're signing out now. Thank you.